Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on supporting infants and new parents experiencing homelessness, our conversation with Infant House. We are so glad that you've joined us today. Just a few housekeeping reminders as folks log on and get settled and before we get into our discussion. This webinar will last 1 hour. We ask that you use the Q&A box to type your questions. I am sure you will have many for our expert presenters today, and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the duration of our session and make sure we're getting to as many questions as possible. I want to assure you that this session is being recorded and we will post it on Schoolhouse Connections archived webinars page for you to access after. And if you are here with us today, you will receive an automated email certificate for attendance as a thanks for being here. And then we encourage you to join our community conversation on Slack afterwards. If you have Slack, that's great. If not, it's super easy to use. That's where you can connect with your peers across the country who are doing similar work in the early care and education of children and youth experiencing homelessness. So we encourage you to join us there. A little bit about Schoolhouse Connection, if you're not familiar with us. We are so grateful that you have joined today. We are a national nonprofit advocacy organization, and we work to overcome homelessness through early care and education from prenatal to post-secondary. We do this in partnership with states, communities, and policymakers at the state and federal levels. We encourage you to check out our website, schoolhouseconnection.org. We have tons of resources there, everything from caring for our youngest infants and toddlers to expectant parents. A lot of the work we do in the K-12 education space can be accessed on our website. And we also have a post-secondary area of practice. We also say the jewel in our crown is our network of young scholars who have experienced homelessness themselves and who we are privileged to support through scholarship assistance as well as case management support as they take the next step on their journey. A little bit more about how we work towards our mission of overcoming homelessness through education. If you are in this field, if you've been working in this field for a while, then this should come as no surprise to you that early care and education can break the cycle of homelessness. And we go about this through responsive and effective policy advocacy at the federal and state levels, helping to pass policies that remove barriers for children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness so that they can continue accessing education, as well as all the other range of supports that we know they need. We also offer a range of practical assistance to the field. A lot of K-12 school districts come to us with questions and requests for professional development sessions, which we're happy to provide. We also try and offer a lot of resources, tip sheets, tools, checklists that you all can find useful in your particular area of this work. And then, as I mentioned, we have our youth leadership and scholarship program. Those are our young people with lived experience who we support in their post-secondary journey and who we learn from along the way as well, and who help us understand the issue and their needs better. I want to start off by offering a brief overview of the issue that brings us to this conversation today, and want to share some information about infant and toddler homelessness across the U.S. from Schoolhouse Connections analysis. And before we get into our data, I want to level set. I know that many of you may be coming into this conversation and are familiar with McKinney Vento and that definition of homelessness. Some of you may not be. And so I want to make sure we're all level setting. When Schoolhouse Connection talks about homelessness, we are using the McKinney Vento Assistance Act definition. And this is the federal definition that defines homelessness as lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And in practice, this may look like a family staying in a car, park, or abandoned building. It could be those who are staying in emergency or transitional shelters, and that does include domestic violence shelters. It could also include those who are staying in motels and hotels, or importantly, those who are sharing the housing of others, which we refer to as doubled up homelessness. And those are families, children, and youth who are sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason. And we're happy to answer any questions about that, but wanted to make sure we're level setting on the definition of homelessness for our conversation today. When we talk about this definition, it's important to understand that it's not only our K-12 school systems that are implementing this definition. We see this also in our Head Start and Early Head Start programs. They are required to prioritize children experiencing homelessness for immediate enrollment. And it also, federal rule allows Head Start and Early Head Start programs to reserve up to 3% of their slots for children experiencing homelessness, recognizing the importance of access to early childhood development. This also applies to our early intervention and child find services. You can see here states must make those services available to homeless infants and toddlers as defined by McKinney Vento. And then, of course, LEAs identifying and evaluating children with disabilities who might be experiencing homelessness. States also prioritize homeless children and families through their childcare plans, CCDF plans. All states through the federal childcare regulations are required to prioritize families experiencing homelessness. And they do that in a number of ways. And we encourage you to check out your state's plan to see what's offered in terms of days that families have to submit immunization requirements, co-payments that might be waived, et cetera. And then in the housing world, any program receiving HUD homeless assistance is required to make referrals to early childhood development programs when a family comes under their care who has an age-eligible child. And it's important to make sure you are partnering with those programs in your community and those entities to make sure they are aware of this requirement and know you, if you are an early childhood provider, and know how to partner and make those referrals. If you are here from a home visiting program, we haven't forgotten about you. McV, the Maternal Infant Early Childhood Home Visiting Program, does require data collection, asking about families' living situation, and those questions are aligned with the McKinney-Vento definition. And that is Form 1, Table 11, if you are the person responsible for filling out that information. So again, just to emphasize that this definition of homelessness is shared across our systems and agencies, and it recognizes the need for young children in particular to have access to high quality developmental services and supports. And we'll get into a little bit more of that. Before we go into some of our data, I want to just take a moment, again, recognizing that some folks on this webinar might be new to SchoolHouse or new to this issue. You will hear us talk about children experiencing homelessness, infants experiencing homelessness, expectant parents experiencing homelessness. And this is why we use that phrase. It's mostly because we've heard direct impact from those with lived experience that homelessness does not define them. It is not their identity. It is an experience, hopefully a short-lived one, if at all. And so instead of saying a homeless person, we want to say a person experiencing homelessness out of recognition of the fact that this is something that does not define them. Similarly, the reason we don't use terms like unhoused is because that McKinney-Vento definition does include those who are doubled up and who could be living in a house as a structure, but still experiencing homelessness. And so you can find more, including this resource on our website, but we try and be careful about how we talk about this issue and this experience. I want to start with some numbers to define the issue that we'll be discussing today. Across the US, 3% of all infants and toddlers experience homelessness, and that's ages birth through 3. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. 3% of them experience homelessness, and approximately 75% thereabout are living doubled up. And you can see here another 11% are staying in shelters. And we'll get into the significance of that, particularly when we're talking about this age group, infants who are trying to meet different developmental milestones and needing a safe place to do that. 9% are living in hotels, motels, and then 4.6% are unsheltered children. A few things to point out with regard to this data. HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, reported a 34% increase in homelessness among families with young children. And that was in 2024. That's after a 16% increase in 2023. So homelessness among infants, toddlers, and children is on the rise, and this is concerning. We saw an 84,000 increase in homelessness among infants and toddlers. So 84,000 more infants and toddlers were homeless in the 22-23 program year as compared to the previous program year. And then we also know from research from the eviction lab that it's actually babies who are the age group at greatest risk of eviction. We often talk about eviction in adult-centered terms, not being able to pay the rent, looking for rental assistance, things that you would imagine adults doing. And we don't often consider the babies that are in those households and are also being impacted by those evictions. And again, all of these links are in our PowerPoint, which my colleagues will share in the chat for you, so you have access to it. We'll also share it out after the webinar today. A few more data points and information about homelessness among infants in particular. We know that 15.2% of infants and toddlers live in crowded housing, which again, going back to those developmental milestones, can jeopardize their healthy development. 2.9% of babies and toddlers have moved 3 or more times since birth. And so that lack of stability can certainly have an impact on their growth trajectory. And we also know that simply being pregnant or being a parent increases your risk of experiencing homelessness. I think it's no surprise that the cost of living, the cost of caring for a child can be the difference between being stably housed or experiencing homelessness. And we also know that young parents had 3 times the risk of experiencing homelessness, young parents in that 16 to 24 age range. And in fact, being a parent is the second highest risk factor for young adult homelessness, second only to lack of a high school diploma. So that intersection of education and parenting is an important piece of this conversation. A few more things that are important to keep in mind as we move into our conversation today. Homelessness in infancy in particular can cause delays in language, literacy, and social emotional development. We also know that the younger and longer a child experiences homelessness, the greater the cumulative toll of negative health outcomes. And of course, the impacts of homelessness on young children are long lasting. And there's research showing that the impacts of homelessness remain even after families are housed. So we see this show up in children in the early elementary years who have experienced homelessness in previous years. And the stress and trauma of that is still present and still determines how they navigate different situations emotionally and behaviorally. On the long-term picture, high school students who experience homelessness are 10 times more likely to become pregnant or to get someone pregnant. And we also know the reverse is true. High school students who become pregnant are then 10 times more likely to experience homelessness. And so these overlaps between homelessness, pregnancy and parenting, and being a younger parent are significant. And we know that homelessness in the early years, as we mentioned, can cause these delays, trauma, and challenges that might be more difficult or require more intensive interventions to mitigate and overcome. So we know that if all these things are bad, then we need to make sure families with infants in particular are accessing both housing assistance and services as well as early childhood development services. But it's hard when you're experiencing homelessness for all of the reasons you see here. Different definitions means that families are navigating 2 different systems or trying to navigate 2 different systems, some of which they might have access to, some of which they might not. Families experiencing homelessness are highly mobile and so might not be able to regularly attend a program or have access to one particular service consistently. Lack of documentation, which I alluded to earlier, not having a birth certificate on hand, not having immunization records, those things can prevent families from being able to access different services. Lack of transportation is such a huge barrier and need among families. And then lack of awareness of the best way to reach families and children who are experiencing homelessness. And so, we are going to turn today to our experts in the field. I am thrilled to be joined by our 3 panelists, and I am going to turn to them first and ask them to introduce themselves and tell us about their role.
Hello, my name's Serena Graves, and I am the Director of Housing Programs here at Family Promises Spokane. And I've been with this organization since 2016, working with serving families, caring for children that are experiencing homelessness and housing instability.
Hi, my name is Tony Burke, and I am the Shelter Programs Director for Family Promises Spokane. I have been working here at Family Promise for 3 years, and my background has been in family homelessness for the last 8 years. Yeah, it's just exciting, and I'll shoot it over to our last person.
I'm Erin Blessing, and I've been with Family Promise since 2020. And shortly after starting working, I moved over to the infant house, where I've been the program manager there for 4 years or so.
4 years.
Yeah, so I get to work with all the babies every day and see them all come in and see them flourish. So
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here. Would love for you to tell us a little bit more about Family Promise Spokane, your history, your mission, and the types of services that you provide.
Yes, so Family Promise of Spokane is part of a national affiliate and was started here in Spokane back in 1998 by a local church that saw the need for services for families that were experiencing homelessness, and families caring for children that were experiencing homelessness. It began as a very small organization that was run by church volunteers and churches and served 3 to 4 families a year. The model at the time was a church rotational model where families would stay in churches, church basements, church members' homes at night, and then they would be transported to a day center during the day where they would receive case management services and things like that. And Family Promise ran that way here for many years. They used that model. And then in 2016, Spokane was seeing a growing need for homeless services for families with children. Within all the local emergency shelters, there was nowhere that a family with minor children could just walk in on an emergency basis and stay the night. So the city of Spokane approached Family Promise to see if they'd be willing to pilot an emergency shelter for families with children. And this is how our emergency shelter began. And that's when I started with Family Promise. Our mission at Family Promise is to equip families and communities to end the cycle of homelessness. In order to accomplish this mission, we use what we call the proven path to housing stability. And we've created all of our programs around this proven path idea. So basically it is using the fastest and least traumatic methods to house people and to shelter people. Our main focus across all of our programs is housing. So we design all of our case management around just housing and housing first. Everything we do is very low barrier. So we get housing and we keep housing. Those are our main programs. There's a lot of different barriers for families staying stably housed and getting them housed, but we focus on the immediate barriers in order to quickly house using the most trauma-informed methods. Our 3 main programs are prevention, shelter, and stabilization. So in prevention, we focus on keeping a family from losing the housing that they already have and not entering the shelter system at all. This program is mostly rental assistance right now with some short-term case management. And then if a family becomes homeless, then they can come into our shelter and they can walk in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, walk into a safe shelter. And then they'll work with our housing case managers to get them quickly housed. Once a family is housed in permanent housing, then they would start working with our stabilization team in that case management setting, and they will work with that team for up to 2 years. And this has proven very effective to keep families from losing their housing because these case managers are working with the families closely and building a trust and a rapport, and also with the landlords at the same time, so that if things come up, they're catching it before it threatens their housing. And then a few years ago, we recognized the unique need of infants that were showing up at our shelters or being born in our shelters, and why it wasn't the best environment to have these young babies in our congregate living settings. So I will let Tony take it from here to talk about that.
So as Serena said, we are a low barrier, and we are one family shelter here in Spokane. We are the only family shelter that sees single dads. So there is no other shelter in Spokane that takes single dads with children. But also we look at the needs of the children. And the whole infant house and offsite shelter came about, as she said, do we want babies in a space where other individuals are there? And so that was the birth of the infant house, along with the tail end of COVID. Was it safe for children to be in the shelter at that time? So the way that we walk, you can come in to the shelter based on either a phone call, walk in, another agency may, find a family on the street and break them in. And then we look at the needs of the family at that point, especially with an infant. We will put them over at the infant house. And the infant house within itself I saw a question that came up. It's like, how was that funded? It was funded through different grants to buy the house and just to be able to fund that infant house program. Currently, to date, we've housed, I believe we talked about it earlier, 63 families through there. And through that 63, there's been 60 babies, infants, from 0 to 6 months that have gone through that house. So with those 63, 49 have been successfully housed in permanent housing. Around a 78-79% housing rate for that. And what does it look like for when a family comes in? We talked about homelessness. Erin, you talked about living in a car, doubling up, and things like that. Low barrier, what does low barrier look like? And that could be they're here in our shelter due to substance use, domestic violence. There's so many different reasons that they come in, but when they come in, it's a very traumatic experience for not only the adult, but the children that were there and the babies. The babies feed off of that. So our job here at the shelter is to stabilize them within 24 hours, get them where they need to. So Serena and her team can work their magic in getting them housing, since housing first is our first priority in this aspect. We work closely with some of the programs that you just talked about, McKinney, Vento. What does that look like with the school? We have awesome partnerships, which I'm going to let Erin talk about those partnerships that specifically do with the infant house. But any barrier, because no matter what it is, substance abuse, domestic violence, mental illness, behavioral health, whatever, they're able to come in here, and we work on helping that family. Put it over to you.
Okay, so when the families do arrive at the infant house, generally they're pretty stressed out, in crisis. So we just kind of get them settled in, because the good thing is it's a really big house, and so they each have their own bedroom. Each family has a bedroom with a door they can close, and I think that's especially important for new parents who have infants, because oh yeah, there it is.
There's your house.
It's a good picture. So once they kind of get stabilized and everything, we get them what they need, because how terrifying to be giving birth and not have anywhere to go afterwards. So we get them what they need, and diapers, and we're usually able to. We have very generous donors, because everybody wants to help babies, So we usually have all the diapers and wipes and formulas and everything, and then we figure out what do they need. Another thing is that we allow other agencies to come in and do their services in the house. So if it's physical therapy or whatever it may be, so that's, I think, pretty helpful, lessens the load of stress for them, because they know that they have people that their people can come in, and yeah, they have an address they can give. And So that's a good one. And then we do have some pretty good partnerships. I have had several moms come through that have been struggling with substance use. And so there's one organization, Maddie's Place, and they help right when the baby's born, they help detox the baby. They have a nurse on site and everything. And so once the baby is detoxed and stable, then they come to the infant house. And so we work pretty closely with them. And even we have like a local furniture store that has provided us with all kinds of furniture, couches and cribs and whatnot. And then there's a couple other pretty good agencies that just work with, kids ages 0 to 3. So they can all come in and I think that also, being that all the families that are in that specific house have an infant, they tend to sort of bond with each other and get this feeling of community. And I think that's really nice for everyone because, it's such a stigmatized, population. And they're like, hey, we're not alone. There's other people that are in the same boat, sort of, so that's, I think, pretty helpful. And I mean, these people that come through are so grateful to have it. And it's nice to see, it's humbling. So, yeah, I don't know if that's covered.
Yeah. So it's something I just want to touch on too, is one thing about Family Promises, we have a lot of relationships within the community. We have, because they're infants and infants have other needs and there may be some health issues that we partnered with Gonzaga University on their nursing program to come in. We have partnered with Washington State University's nursing program, and they come in and they give us 2 nursing students dedicated strictly to the infant house. That their educational path may be pediatrics, and that's where they want to go. So they go and do their internship at the infant house. We've also, because we know that nutrition, as you talked about earlier, has really played a part in a child's growth from development from birth up until, high school. We have the EWU, Eastern Washington University dental program that comes in and starts from nutrition from birth until the child's 18. So there's a lot of different partnerships that we have built within the community that really have helped. Aaron talked about physical therapy and occupational therapy and having them come in. We've had Whitward's doctorate program come in and do the physical therapy and occupational therapy for babies. So there's a lot of different partnerships that we have that keeps that house thrived, and just allows us to work through donor relations that way.
I just caught a glimpse of one of the things that came up in the chat. So I'll go back to the funding and kind of how we started. So this house was actually a house that for 30 years had nuns were living in it. So it belonged to this convent, and they all retired, and the last one there, wanted to do something good with the house. So we got lucky there and were able to buy it at a pretty good price. We were just, making mortgage payments, and then our executive director approached Providence Medical, who ended up being one of our largest funders for like the operations. So they gave us a bunch of money to, keep it running. And then we applied for an ARPA grant that helped to pay off the mortgage. So that's kind of how our funding went.
That's fantastic. I am seeing a lot of, you got some heart emoji reactions. I think a lot of our participants are so curious to learn more, to know how they might be able to find or replicate something like this in their communities. I have a couple more questions for you, and then would love to, again, remind our audience that you can share any additional questions you have through our Q&A box. That's where we'll be checking, and we'll have some time to get to the audience questions. I know you mentioned some of the services and supplies that you provide for infants and families coming into Infant House. I wonder if there are any other biggest pressing needs that you see among families you serve when they walk through your door.
Well, I see a lot of people with transportation issues. Like they'll have a car, but the car is not drivable because brakes or whatever. So that's a big one. Just because when you are involved with all these agencies, you have to go to places. And so that's a big one. And childcare, of course, because, you know, you want to get housed, so you got to get a job. So that's a big one, which a lot of our partners are good with helping us get them childcare and stuff. I don't know, what else do you think? I mean, they just really are looking for like, a lot of people just really want to vent and like get some stuff off their chest. And, you know, there's a lot of the times I see families that have problems, you know, between the partners, like mom and dad, you know, they're fighting and stuff. And so, you know, being able to sort of point them in directions of where they can go talk to somebody, like a therapist or, you know, that kind of thing. So those are all probably big ones.
That's hugely helpful to hear. Serena, you had mentioned something earlier, and I really appreciate the way you said it. The family promise approach is to help families access housing in the least traumatic way possible. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that for our audience who might not be familiar with how a family navigates housing services. What in particular might be traumatic about the experience, and how has Family Promise and Infant House been able to overcome those obstacles?
Yeah. So, being homeless is traumatic. Experiencing homelessness is traumatic, and especially on children. And if you can imagine, you know, walking into a mass congregate shelter with a bunch of other people that you don't know, and just the trauma of just that. But a lot of people are showing up with traumas other than homelessness as well, that they're coming in with. So, we've spent a lot of time looking at, you know, what are the least traumatic interventions. So, what it kind of goes ladder. So the shelter is still one of your more traumatic interventions. So we want to get people out of the shelter as quickly as possible. So, and that's where Housing First comes in. We just really believe that we want to get them housed first, and then we can start conversations about, you know, substance use or mental health, or, you know, all of the other things that, you know, they may be struggling with. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. That's very helpful. Tony, were you going to jump in with something there?
No, I was just like I was saying, she kind of froze a little bit, but we, as being a housing first model, we knock down those barriers. What are those barriers? You talked about documentation earlier today. Getting, what does it need? What do we need to do to get them into the house first? Where that approach is a little bit different than some other agencies that might be like, let's fix the problem and then jump into housing. Where Serena, as she talked about earlier, get housing, keep housing. That's where our keep housing folks come in. It's like we get them the house, and then now let's work on reducing those extra barriers that are going to get you to keep your housing. With the infant house, I can honestly say when a person comes into the infant house and they get in there, as Aaron talked about, diapers and things like that, there may be older children that are in the household also. So how do we stabilize, take something off the parents' plate, making sure they get them into school, that they're getting to school in time, making, you know, we have partnerships for food, making sure with that family has a healthy meal. And so it's building those relationships and community. And Aaron talked about community in the infant house. Yes, we're building community, but when we think about community, we think about our neighborhoods, but we don't think about going to the store, the same store. You may go to Starbucks and you see your same barista every single day. That's building community. And so some of our families, due to their situations, may be out of community for years. And this is the first time they've been stabilized in years. So we really push through what we feel are the most important things to build the community so they can be successful when they get into that keep housing situation.
That's so helpful to hear. I just saw some praise in the chat. Someone from Nashua, New Hampshire says we have a family promise here in Nashua, and it's truly a magic wand type of program. So thank you for everything you do. A couple of questions I'm going to try and pose all together, but tell me if it's too confusing and we can break them down. I think there was some questions around clarifying if there is a vetting process in order to gain access to Family Promise or Infant House. So maybe speak to that first.
No, we don't have a vetting process at all. If you are coming in and we have the space, and sometimes even when we don't have the space, we're going to bring you in. Now, the infant house, when it originally started, I believe it was babies for 0 to 6 months. And we kind of, I saw a question earlier, like, what does it take? How long does a person stay there? Our goal is to get them housed within 60 days. And then once we get them housed, they have, as Serena said it earlier, case management or their STEPS program for up to 2 years. And that's where the stabilization comes in. But there is no vetting process other than the fact that you have a baby and that baby has a need.
I would say, I would just want to add that, so although we don't do background checks, we don't do drug testing, we don't do anything like that, we're extremely low barrier. We do, since we have children here, obviously we do a sex offender check, but that's the only thing that we do that would stop someone from being able to come in with their kids.
Thank you for that. And another clarifying question, are pregnant women allowed into Infant House?
Yes. Yeah. And we see that. I mean, just last year alone, I think total, we've had like, I think they said 20 babies last year that came in, where they're either pregnant and came in and had their children, or just had them and came in. I think it was like 20 babies last year.
We have 3 brand new babies right now that were just born within the last like 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow. It truly is an infant house.
Yes.
That's amazing.
And especially really helpful for, I mean, we've had situations where a mom knows that she's going to have a cesarean. And if you can imagine, having major surgery and then having a baby and being in a congregate shelter and not being able to sleep when you need to sleep and rest and all that. So that's been a huge thing, with being able to have this infant house where a mom can recuperate and recover from that surgery.
That's such a great example of just the specific needs that a parent and their child might go through during this time. We have a couple more questions that have come in that I want to be sure I'm getting to, and encourage our audience to keep asking your questions. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the age ranges you see of your parents who you're serving through Infant House. Do they have to be 18 and older? Do you have a wider range of ages there?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be over 18 to stay with a minor child in your care. But I think that, yeah, I would say I actually had a family that mom was like 17 and dad was like 19, and so they were right there. That's the youngest I can recall having. But like right now we have families that are anywhere from, I think our youngest is like early 20s, like 20 years old, and all the way up to mid 30s, usually somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah, that's helpful. I know you've mentioned a goal of getting families and infants into stable housing within 60 days, and then you provide stabilization care. I think you said up to 2 years after. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about why that's so important for folks who might think, well, they have housing, so aren't you done? What kinds of services are you providing during that time, and what do families usually need during that stabilization period?
Yeah, so it can look like so many different things. So one thing that we like to say at Family Promise is it's not just a lack of housing that people are coming in with, it's a lack of community. So really that's the core of it. So it's going all the way through our programs, from coming into a shelter, working with the case managers, working with the family advocates, and then working with the stabilization case managers. It's creating this relationship, and it's becoming their community. So by the time we are putting them in housing, we've talked to the landlords that they're going to be working with. We've sat down and done the lease with them. We've, all of these things that they really need someone walking alongside them to. A lot of people have never had their own housing. They've never signed a lease before. There's things that, they just need some guidance with. And it can really, that stabilization program we've had, it might be like they might need help with some rent. They might be short on rent once in a while. So it might be financial things. It might be they need a ride to the doctor or to a court hearing or something like that. Sometimes it's just as simple as I'm just out of quarters for laundry, things like that. So, but also like bigger picture, the idea is that if things do start to slide, and which it can start with something small and then it can really escalate into where they would jeopardize their housing, hopefully that just having that relationship with them and with their landlord, someone is going to reach out to that case manager and say, hey, could you talk with them? We're seeing this and it's worrisome. So establishing that relationship with the landlord has been really instrumental in being successful in this.
That's very helpful. I know that you all have provided some additional photos, so I wonder if we could maybe walk through these and you could tell us a little bit more about what's been going on at Infant House and what you all have been able to engage in.
That was this Christmas, and those kids, they did pretty well. I mean, after Christmas, I was like, you guys have to condense your presents. They were like coming out of your rooms and everything. So there were some happy kids this year. That was really nice to see. And then I think I saw one of the backyard, which we just recently had. We had a whole bunch of, the grass was all dead and it was like muddy, and so we had donors that came in, and a landscaping group, Copper Creek, I think they were called, and they put down AstroTurf there, and they gave us these beds to put, flowers or vegetables or whatever, and because a lot of the times we get people that like to garden and grow their own veggies and stuff, so thankfully, because I don't know how to do any of that, so that's pretty cool. And they can bring their dogs. If they have dogs, they can have their dogs there. So a nice yard for the dogs to run around in and stuff like that.
To this picture here, when I took over as the shelter director, they asked me, like, you could have one thing, what would you do? And I was like, we have infant babies. Sometimes they have toddler brothers and sisters, and the dogs, and there was really nowhere for them to play. And so Numerica, who is a good partner with us, said, what would you want, Tony? I said, I want a good, safe place for the babies and the kiddos to play. And she's like, okay, I'll be back. 2 weeks later, they came back and they're like, we have somebody that's willing to donate the whole entire backyard for you. So they ripped out what little grass we had. They re-landscaped it, gave us the thing. This is all AstroTurf in there that is pet friendly also. So if the pets happen to go to the bathroom on it, it's going to go through and it's not going to, harm the babies. And they did the whole backyard, all the bushes, everything within an 8-hour period, all donated by an awesome landscaper here in the area who just had a love for kids. So this picture is just like one that it's the first project I did here as the director, and I just fell in love with it because it was just a good place for the babies to have a safe place to play.
That's
amazing.
amazing.
They've been like in the summer they'll set up like those bouncy houses with the water slides on them and stuff like that. I mean they have a good time back there.
And there was snow on the ground the other day, and they were at a barbecue.
Yeah.
In the backyard.
Yeah, it's cute.
Snow.
It's really cute.
It's really cute.
That's amazing. So much affirmation of that idea in this project. And I love the consideration of what the specific needs of families with young children and pets and the whole family might be, and how you've been able to incorporate that. I have maybe one more question, and then I'll keep an eye on our chat and our Q&A box to see if our audience has any others.
Okay.
I guess my question for you is, if someone wanted to either find a similar family shelter or start one in their community, what's your advice to them? Where should they start? What should they know? Your advice.
I think that knowing your community, acceptance is a big one. You know, quite honestly, we were one of the first shelter sites in Spokane, what we call scattered sites, where people, it's not part of the original emergency shelter. And Spokane is going to that scattered site model where smaller, you get more intimate settings, you're able to help more and place people in housing. And we've been successful for that since we opened the infant house. And as we went to community meetings and we're talking to communities, they would turn around and say, hey, we don't want them here. And I was like, little did you know, for the last 6 years, you've had one of them in the community and you didn't even know it. And so building up, how do you want to interface with that community? What are we looking for? And, we're very blessed with this house because it's on a bus line. There is a major store right down the street. And they can get where they need to via the bus. But I think knowing your community and what your family needs are, and then I would say give Joe a call because he knows all the ins and outs of how to put this together.
Yeah, I would say the medical community. So like I said, one of our biggest supporters was Providence, and reaching out to them was a really smart move for our executive director, because appealing to the need for, these babies that, aren't doing well in congregate living shelters. But there's block grants out there, ARPA funds, things like that to purchase buildings. Hopefully those funds stick around, but
Erin, any last words of wisdom or advice?
I think that getting to know your neighbors is important, because like the guy next door, in the beginning, he approached me and was a little bit like kind of cranky about us being there, but I think we've done a pretty good job winning him over. He now, like, he called me the other day asking if we could he could look at our cameras because the car was stolen, and like not blaming us. He doesn't think we did it, but and he's friendly with the people that are out in the yard. They'll wave at each other over the fence, and because I mean, people are respectful. If they realize, I just try to make it clear to people, like, look, we need to be good neighbors here, because show them that homelessness isn't like a crime or doesn't make you a bad person. So yeah, I think get to know your neighbors.
Very good advice for our audience here today. I'm going to move us on to some reminder and closing slides, but want to let our folks know that the chat and Q&A boxes are still open. So if you have additional questions, I encourage you to submit those. A few resources from SchoolHouse Connection on the issue of infant homelessness in particular. We did publish a 50-state data scan that shows the prevalence of infants and toddlers experiencing homelessness in your state. Our next annual version will be coming out on April 30th, so we'll have new data to share there. We also have a set of case studies on supporting infants and toddlers who are experiencing homelessness, programs from across the country who have done great work, just like Family Promise and Infant House are doing. And encourage you to check out more data on our website through our child and youth homelessness profiles. You can access your state's data. And this is not confined to just infants and toddlers, but it shows all children experiencing homelessness across the country and in your state, ages birth through grade 12, along with some really helpful school district and county level breakdowns. And then there's some deeper dives for schools that we have available, some practical strategies to serve younger children experiencing homelessness if you are in an educational setting. And you can see here more resources. We call ourselves the Baby Brigade. So anything that we can put out to you to help folks understand the unique experiences of infants who are experiencing homelessness, I encourage you to check those out on our website. We have a few webinars coming up, inspiring best practices for improving attendance of students experiencing homelessness. This is a series that will be kicking off on March 13th, which is next week, if you can believe it, and then a part 2 on March 18th. And then we also encourage you on March 18th, we'll have our Back to Basics webinar on understanding and implementing the McKinney-Vento Act. We get a lot of questions, and we do a lot of back to school webinars on McKinney-Vento in the fall, but sometimes you need a quick refresh. And so we wanted to be responsive to our audience, who are mostly K-12 liaisons, and make sure we're offering you some reminders and tips and tools there. We encourage you to connect with us. We are on all the platforms. And then, as I mentioned, we have a Slack community. Slack is really easy to use if you've never used it, but that is a messaging platform that allows you to connect with your peers across the country who are doing similar work on behalf of children and youth experiencing homelessness. So we encourage you to check out the conversations there. We have a lot of threads going on, a lot of different questions that only you can help us answer as the experts in the field. We also want you to know that we have an email listserv. We send out an e-newsletter about once a week. We try not to bombard you. We found it really helpful, particularly now in the early days of the new administration, to help communicate with the field about what's changing and what's not. And there are opportunities for you all to get involved. And mostly we share our resources. Again, we try and put out checklist tools, things that you can use in your everyday role to help children and youth experiencing homelessness. So I encourage you to sign up for it. You can access that through the QR code here on your screen, or you can go to our website, schoolhouseconnection.org, to sign up for that. We also have an advocacy network. So here again, we listen and learn to the field first, and use what we learn through your experiences to help us inform our policy advocacy efforts. So if you are interested in getting involved in that, there's information here at this link, understanding that some people are able or comfortable to engage at that level, some people aren't, and that's okay. We just want to offer you the option here to get more involved in advocacy. This is my contact information. I'm going to ask our presenters if they don't mind sharing their contact info or someone's contact info in the chat. We've had some requests for that from our audience in case they want to get back in touch with you to learn more. And you'll be receiving, like I said, the recording and slides from this webinar through a follow-up email. You'll also receive a feedback survey as part of that. And so we encourage you to share your feedback about today's conversation, including anything else you want to hear more of on this or other topics in the related to children and youth experiencing homelessness. And the last thing I'll say is thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our audience for your great engagement and questions. And special thanks to Serena, Tony, and Aaron, not just for joining us today, but for all the amazing work you're doing to help families, infants, and children experiencing homelessness in Spokane. Thanks so much, everyone. Wish you a wonderful afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you on a webinar again soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.